We're going to continue the discussion and reaction to the budget here now with the Conservatives and Shadow Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, Gareth Davies. Very good to see you. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Hoping to be the next Shadow Chancellor because the job's available now.
Do you know, it's been a long leadership campaign. I'm pleased that it's coming to a conclusion.
So is most people.
I'll play whatever role the new leader wants me to play. But there's certainly a lot to talk about when it comes to Treasury matters, given the budget this week.
So let's get into that now. And I guess there's a line in the sand being drawn from a party, certainly in the final couple of years running up to the election, that wanted to see less spending to one that wants to see more spending, and we'll find out in the next 3 or 4 years if that works.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily characterise it like that. We increased spending on the NHS, for example, to record highs, but we were always clear that you can't just keep pumping money into public services without reform, without productivity gains. We spent billions, for example, on the NHS when it comes to new technology to boost productivity. And when it came to public sector pay deals, we were always clear that it had to come with conditions around productivity gains. And that's not what we're seeing with this Labour government. And I have to say,
you wouldn't have been able to deliver the scale of spending, for example, on the NHS that's just been announced.
Well, I'm not speculating on what we could or could not have done. If we'd have had the budget this week, obviously we would have made decisions based on market conditions and what headroom we had according to the OBR. So
you wouldn't have done a 22 billion boost to annual spending on the NHS.
Well, I'm not going to speculate on what we could or could not have done because I didn't see all the analysis that Treasury ministers have available to them in the run-up to a budget. But what I can say is that if you look at our record, we were spending on the NHS, but as I say, it came with reform, it came with productivity gains. That's what's lacking here. We are seeing in this budget working people, but small businesses pay for public sector upgrades.
At a low. I mean, after 14 years in government, productivity fell.
So let me be really clear with this, because it's a good point and good question. Productivity in the public sector is about 4.95% below pre-pandemic productivity levels. And we were always clear, if we could get that back up to pre-pandemic levels, that would equate to around £35 billion worth of savings, essentially, in terms of NHS spending. And that's why, at the last budget in March, we had a whole programme of productivity gains for the NHS. And when we had negotiations with the public sector unions, it always was on condition that they would reform and that they would be more productive workers. But before the pandemic, actually productivity was going up. It was improving under the Conservatives, but we were obviously hit by the global pandemic, and productivity, particularly in the NHS, has gone down. That is absolutely right. But we're seeing nothing from this government other than just pumping it with money without reform to fix that.
But let's just touch on the headline point, because you kind of avoided the question earlier. There's a huge increase in spending from this budget, and we will see in the years to come if that boosts the economy in a meaningful and lasting way or not. You acknowledged that you would not have been able to do that same boost in spending unless you also embrace tax rises and more borrowing.
I can't speculate on what we would not have done, but just as we had done in previous budgets, we would have made difficult decisions, right? We would have had those difficult conversations with the unions. We would have found savings. By the way, £12 billion worth of savings in welfare reform that was announced at the March budget, which have been scrapped by the Labour government.
They haven't been scrapped. They're just not being trumpeted to the same point. No one's just giving up on free money or free efficiency gains. It's a difference in what you're focusing on today. You could not have done a big increase in spending that this government is doing without either the same tax or borrowing increases.
I think the premise of the question is the wrong one, if I may say.
OK, fine. We'll come back to that, but can you answer the question first?
Your suggestion is that the solution to public sector productivity decline after the pandemic is just to pump it with more money. That is not the case. That is not the case. It is about productivity gains, which was a major focus. We had a major productivity review of the public sector under the last government and at the last budget. That is not being taken forward. The answer is not just more money without condition, without reform, without productivity gains. That is the big difference here. But what a lot of your viewers will be asking this morning is, what am I paying these £40 billion worth of taxes for if the economy is not going to grow, if debt is going to go up, and there are going to be no productivity gains in the public sector? That's what they're asking this morning.
They might be asking that, but we can also ask, if you're pushing all these productivity opportunities where they were to materialise in the 14 years, but beforehand, again, I come back to the point about this conspiracy of silence that both sides were very much to blame for coming into the election. It's just that now you're not in government, you're not held to account because you're not producing the numbers, as you're saying. I mean, I guess the question continues to come back to the point of, would you have had to cut spending more than you alluded to in your manifesto?
Well, let me try and address it directly. Every 3 to 4 years, the government produces what's called a spending review, which sets out the long-term spending for each government department. The last one was conducted in 2021, and the next one was due to be conducted this year or next year. We felt it was not appropriate to do a full spending review of all departments just before a general election. We felt that whoever won the election should have that mandate from the British public to be able to set forth a spending plan for each department. That's why we didn't have a spending review before the election. It wouldn't have been responsible to do so. Labour are now in the thralls of setting out how much they're going to spend, and it's right that now that they are in government, we hold them to account. But it's very difficult for me to say what we would have done, what we could have done, because I just don't have the figures that the Treasury ministers, like Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary, who you had on earlier, has available to them to make those choices. But the choice that they have made is to increase spending, but to also increase taxes by £40 billion, which they said they did not need to do. They went into that election saying not just that they wouldn't raise taxes, but that their plans were fully costed and that they wouldn't need to raise money. That's why people are so dismayed this morning.
Good to see calm markets this morning, as they are.
Well, yesterday was quite a choppy day for markets, and the reaction of market. The good thing about market reaction is that there's no politics in it. They are looking at the hard facts. They're looking at things like the OBR report, which show that there's going to be no growth. That actually growth is going to be downgraded. That show that debt is going to go up by something like 140 billion. That debt interest payments that are going to go up. They're looking dispassionately at this budget and saying, is this going to be good for growth? Is this going to be good for the UK economy and the British people? And they, yesterday, were selling off government bonds because they felt that this was not the case, which meant that Rachel Reeves unbelievably had to go on the airwaves last night to reassure and stabilise markets. That's an incredibly humiliating thing for a chancellor to have to do.
Really?
It is.
It's gone from 4 to 4.5%. It's a noticeable rise, but it's been orderly.
You ask anybody working in the markets.
I understand the markets.
They will
all
I
too
know
well,
you do.
But you want to make this comparison, given to what happened in 2022.
I'm not the one making the comparison. All the newspapers this morning are comparing it to the mini budget. We've had several.
And you're proud of that comparison?
I'm not proud of anything.
Who comes off worse in that comparison?
I think Rachel Reeves comes off worse, given that we've had three fiscal events since the mini budget. And the comparison that people are making of this budget is to a budget that happened in 2022.
You think that Rachel Reeves's move, which has been marginal, from 4 to 4.5% at a time when the 10-year US yield has gone up by half that amount, so the spread is widened by 20, 25 basis points, compared to in 2022, we went from 1.8% to 4.6% in a matter of a month. You think that Rachel Reeves comes off worse than Kwasi Kwarteng, based on the market?
That's not specifically what I said. Of course, that mini budget was a mistake, and Liz Truss had to leave office, and Kwasi Kwarteng was fired on the back of that. What I'm saying is that we have a new Labour government who promised change, who promised to stabilise markets, and what we saw yesterday was not a stable market environment. I think that is embarrassing for Rachel Reeves. I think it's embarrassing she had to go on the airwaves last night to stabilise and calm markets based on her budget, after all the things that they said before the election that they weren't going to do, that they weren't going to be, they have turned out to be the opposite of that.
We are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, Gareth Davies. Good to see you as always, and good luck on the new shadow cabinet. We'll see what happens.